Started. It's about 12:30. If you haven't gotten any Chick-fil-A yet, please feel free to do so. Don't feel like you can't get up just because we're having a conversation. Thank you so much for being here with us for Black History Month. This is going to be a panel with a really wonderful group, so hopefully we'll have a really interesting conversation. We only have about an hour, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our different panelists, and then we'll dive right in. After we get through as many of the questions that we've had that were submitted from the students, we'll, if there's time left, have a live Q&A. So definitely, if you hear something that raises a question, hold on to it, and we might be able to get to it towards the end. But thank you again so much to every one of our panelists who is here now. I'm going to go ahead and get started with our panelists on Zoom, and I'll start with Alvin McKenna. So Mr. McKenna is a graduate of the Notre Dame Law School, class of '66. He is a former senior staff member on the Notre Dame Law Review and the law school's first African-American graduate. His practice as a litigator has led him to be widely recognized as one of the best lawyers in Ohio and often regularly selected for inclusion in the best lawyers in America. His practice has included labor and employment matters, federal state government regulation, constitutional issues, and his representation in those cases has led to several precedent-setting decisions in various parts of the country. Currently, Mr. McKenna serves as counsel to the firm Porter, Wright in Columbus, Ohio, and serves by appointment from the president of Notre Dame as a member of the law school's advisory council. Welcome, Mr. McKenna.
Thank you.
Judge Clair Williams, who is also here over Zoom, is a graduate of the law school class of '75. In 1985, President Ronald Reagan nominated her to the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois, making her the first woman of color to serve on a district court in the three-state Seventh Circuit. 14 years later, in 1999, President Bill Clinton's nomination made her the first judge of color to sit on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit, and the third Black woman to serve on any federal circuit court. Currently, Judge Williams serves as of counsel at Jones Day in Chicago, where she heads the law firm's efforts in advancing the rule of law in Chicago. She's partnered with federal government and NGOs to lead training programs across Africa and Indonesia, and Judge Williams has also taught at the International Criminal Tribunals for Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia. Welcome, Judge Williams.
Good morning, thank you.
Moving on.
Good afternoon, sorry. It's still morning in Chicago.
Oh yeah, there you go. It is true. Moving on to Paris Williams. Paris Williams is also in, Paris Mayfield, who's also in Chicago. Paris, as many of you know, graduated from the law school last year in 2021, where she was executive editor of the Notre Dame Journal on Emerging Technologies. She's currently practicing as a litigation associate with Duane Morris in Chicago, and is someone I'm sure many of you remember from her time here because many of you were here when she was here. Finally, a man who needs no introduction. Dean G. Marcus Cole is not only the first Black dean of the law school, he's also the first Black dean of any school at the University of Notre Dame. His time at the law school so far has already led to significant initiatives that have supported a safer and a more inclusive environment for our students of color, and has helped to unite the law school in the mission of the Catholic Church. One of those initiatives being the creation of the law school's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which I'm particularly grateful for because it's the office that I manage. Welcome, Paris and Dean Cole. Thank you for being here. Okay, so we have a number of questions that were submitted by the Black Law Student Association members, and I want to get started with you, Mr. McKenna, on this first question, which is, what was your experience like at Notre Dame, and how did that experience prepare you for what would be the practice of law? And were there any notable challenges to your time that you encountered while you were in law school?
Well, the experience was scary. As I think you can see from the Zoom, I got there having written an essay to Dean O'Meara when I decided I was going to challenge the world, I guess, on racial issues. I I went to college at age 16 to be a chemist. And after a year of sitting in the lab by myself, I decided this isn't for me. So I decided to get into political science, which was a new major at Canisius College in Buffalo. Then as I got near graduation, I realized nobody was hiring political scientists. So I had to find something else to do. And I guess I decided with a bunch of my fellow classmates to go take the LSAT. Did respectable in that, and ended up at the Notre Dame Law School. I think I've heard a story before. I was not good enough to get into the undergraduate school with a scholarship, so I ended up at Canisius, and where I had a full scholarship covering everything, which was the only way I would go to college. A lot of things were new to me. I come from the inner city of New Orleans, where one of your questions I saw was who inspired you to become a lawyer. There really weren't many Black lawyers in New Orleans. There were three that I recall. One was A.P. Turo, who was the father of a young lady I went to 7 years of elementary school with. What I knew about him was he was going around the state and the country with people like Thurgood Marshall, challenging various discriminatory activities. The other was the son of my godfather, who couldn't practice law, so he was selling insurance. And the other one was a fellow named Israel Augustine, who, if you got to meet him, you probably were in trouble because he did a lot of criminal work. So there really wasn't anyone that inspired me to become a lawyer. I just became a lawyer. And I found as I got to Notre Dame, I had a lot of classmates who had fathers who were lawyers, relatives who were lawyers. I had none of that. My parents, neither one of them finished elementary school, but they were big on getting an education. My older brother disappointed them because all he wanted to do was join the Marines and drag my father down to the recruiting station on his 17th birthday to join the Marines. So I was it. But I was pushed along to pursue academics. I was not a jock and certainly not a musician. So that's how I ended up there. And the experience, the people were great, both the professors and my classmates. So it was an experience, or a true learning experience, not only learning about the law, but learning a lot about life and what goes on in the world. Hopefully that covered it.
Judge Williams, I would love to hear your answer to that question as well. And Mr. McKenna raises an interesting idea of not just being a student of color, but also being a first-generation student. And I'm sure you both know we have a first-generation student group here now, but would be very interested to know what your experience was like while you were at the law school, and if there were any barriers that you encountered.
You're muted.
I believe you're on mute.
For me, similar experience, but at least you knew some lawyers. I never knew a lawyer. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan, and both of my parents were victims of discrimination. They both worked their way through college, received college degrees at historically Black colleges. My mother tried to get a job as a teacher, but Blacks weren't being hired in the school system, the Detroit public school system. So she worked at a home for delinquent kids for 12 years. And then she was a substitute teacher for 5 years. 17 years later, she got a contract. My father had a degree in psychology and political science. He came to Detroit, and like many Black men, he couldn't find a well-educated. He couldn't find a job. So he tried to sell insurance. He didn't sell one insurance policy. He was not a good salesman. So he ended up driving a bus with a lot of Black men who had been trained as accountants and lawyers and in other fields. So after 20 years, he decided to apply for a supervisory position. He was interviewed for the position. The white guy who interviewed him told him he wasn't competent to be a supervisor, even though my father had been a staff sergeant in the Army and run a division, of course, under a white captain. And he got mad and he decided to go back to school to get another degree. And I was getting my degree in elementary education, and as fate would have it, Daddy ended up coming back to Wayne, where I was working my way through school, and we were in classes together. And it was in a speech class. Daddy wasn't in that class, but I was asked to discuss who I admired the most in my life. And that was when it hit me: bus driver, college degree, bus driver. So I came home and I asked Daddy, how could he stand it? He had been driving a bus with a degree. And he said, well, no one could take his education away from him. He wanted to, and being a bus driver was good, honest, decent work. And he did it because he wanted to support me and my sisters and my mother. He did what he had to do. But he had that dream of us going further. And so my father has been my inspiration. But in terms of growing up, Perry Mason was who I knew, because Perry Mason won every case. And what I loved about Perry Mason was he'd be cross-examining somebody on the stand and they would confess. Or better yet, he would turn to the audience, start crossing somebody in the gallery, and they would confess. And so I knew about Perry Mason, but I was not planning to go to law school until a friend of mine, I was getting my master's from University of Michigan in guidance and counseling, said that he was thinking of going to law school. We were kind of competitive. I said, well, so am I. So I didn't know we needed a test. I didn't need a test to get my master's at Michigan because I was working full-time as a teacher. There was no admission exam. I took the test late, no prep whatsoever. Thank you, God, I did well. But of course, I took it late in February. Yale, Harvard, Notre Dame, Michigan, Wayne State, no, but see us next year. But Willie Lipscomb, another prominent graduate of Notre Dame, was on campus in a summer program. Granville Cleveland was the only African-American associated with the law school. He was assistant law librarian. He was on the admissions committee. Granville told Willie someone canceled in the class. And Willie recommended me. So I, to this day, have my acceptance and rejection letter from Notre Dame. And that's how I started. Of course, I had Thurgood Marshall and his team in the back of my mind. I had read about them in Jet, but they weren't real to me. And it wasn't until I got all those rejections, I started thinking, well, teachers teach and lawyers teach. Lawyers teach their clients, opposing counsel, judges. Teachers counsel and lawyers counsel. Teachers have to persuade and present material. And so I said, well, maybe I could do this. So I rolled into campus one day before class started, called Willie, was so excited in my dorm. Willie said, and I quote, "Ann Clair, have you done the reading?" I said, Willie, what are you talking about? He said, we have 2 classes together and you have reading. I got my little Volkswagen. It was before GPS and navigation, made my way to Willie's. Willie had to literally explain to me how a defendant can be an appellee. He had to explain all the terms to me. I'm writing in the margins because I don't know anything. That's how I started. So I say to all of you today, look at where I ended up. Look at what the blessings are that you have. You have people that you can look up to, that can mentor you, that are examples for you. And you can go way beyond anything I did. That's how I started Notre Dame. So it was a rough start for me. It was a rough start. And it was something I wasn't used to. I'd gone to 2 public schools, even though I'd gone to Catholic grade school and high school. But I adjusted. I found a lot of support. And actually, Notre Dame is what really set me on my career. And Dean Link was the one that recommended me for my job as a law clerk on the Seventh Circuit. So I just have, and I continue to serve now on the Board of Trustees at Notre Dame, but that's my story.
Thank you so much, Judge Williams. There's a question we've gotten here about imposterism that you got me thinking of as I was listening to your answer, but Paris, love to hear you weigh in on what your experience was like and kind of your feedback on this.
I think that my experience here was pretty good. I had a random pass Notre Dame too, but not in like a hardship way. I just applied to like the top 20 schools. I didn't even know Notre Dame was in Indiana, so imagine my shock when I like landed in South Bend. But I stayed at Notre Dame because I found like a community here. When I was walking through the halls that admitted students stay, I could tell that like professors really cared about their students. I could tell that the students cared about each other. And so I stayed. I know later there's a question about like how deep goal being here and like having the largest Black class like affects law school and what that means. My class, and this was only like 3 years ago, had 8 Black students in it. You're a class of like 200 people, and we had 8 Black students. So like in all of my first year classes, I was like the only Black kid in each class. And I feel like that was more or less the same. There's gonna be more than 2 of us, right, in any section, basically. And so that was kind of alienating in the sense that it's really easy to be like, okay, well, everyone here has, and like everyone's like in the comments talking about, oh, like this law firm and that law firm. I didn't know any law firms' name. They're like, oh, like Jones Day and Kirkland and Ellis. And I was like, I don't want to be a U.S. attorney, I think. Like those were the only jobs that I knew about, being a prosecutor or defense attorney. So I think that there's a really big curveball when you get here and like you don't have that experience. Like Judge Williams and Alvin and McKenna were talking about, I also didn't have any lawyers in my family. My friends' parents weren't really lawyers. I think I had one friend who's out as a lawyer who did like public like insurance defense. So like I didn't really have anyone to look up to or like inspire me to become a lawyer. So when I got here, like I didn't know like how to read a case, or I didn't know like how to do certain things, and it felt like everyone else did. And so I think that that can really impact like how your imposter syndrome affects you. But I just kind of like kept chugging along, and I learned how to read cases. I kind of just stuck to my own game. I think that finding that support system, asking your professors questions, like that really helped me have a pretty good experience at Notre Dame. So that's my perspective.
Great. Dean Cole, this is a question that, we're talking a lot about imposter syndrome. We're talking a lot about being first gen and kind of coming from different experiences, and you can relate to a lot of that, I know. Do you want to remark on any of what has been said so far?
Well, I mean, I think most of you heard my story, and Judge Williams and I commiserate all the time about having similar experiences coming up to law school and then in law school. So, I grew up in the Terrace Village housing projects in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My father worked in a steel mill. My mother worked in a hospital. And my mother actually had a master's degree working in the hospital. She had a master's degree in pharmacy. But my dad didn't have a college degree, and he worked in a steel mill during the day and went to college at night to become an engineer. And I remember my dad would come home from the steel mill, and my mother wouldn't even let him in the house because he just smelled of sulfur and stuff. And so she made him take off his clothes and scrub up in the basement before he could come up into the house. And then, I'll never forget when my dad got his engineering degree. It was a big celebration for us. And from that day on, he got a job with the same steel company, but as an engineer. And he wore a suit every day. And that made a huge impression on me because even though some of the other engineers, in fact, he was the only Black engineer in the company, even though some of the other engineers didn't wear a suit, he wore a suit. And he impressed upon me that there are things that you got to do in life, like support your family, and there's some things you get to do, like wear a suit. He worked in a job where he had to support his family, and he didn't get to wear a suit. So when he got to wear a suit, he wore one every day. And for 22 years, I was at Stanford as a professor, and the students will always talk about, why do you wear a suit every day? I was the only Stanford professor who wore a suit every day. And it's because I appreciated what a suit symbolized for me and the message that it conveyed to my students. I got to wear a suit. When I got to law school, I was just like Judge Williams. I had never met a lawyer until the very first day of law school. My civil procedure professor was the very first lawyer I had ever met. I had no idea of how to navigate law school. I thought that the most important preparation, this just shows you my mindset. I thought that the most important preparation I could have for law school was to learn how to type. I was terrified that I would be slower at typing than the other students. So while everybody else, knew what to do, the summer before law school, I took a typing class in the hopes that I would learn how to be a lawyer and how to write like a lawyer just by being able to type faster. And just like Judge Williams, I had no idea that you had to do the reading on the first day. And just like Judge Williams, I got my clerkship, not because I applied for a clerkship. I didn't know what a clerkship was. I just had several professors who reached down and made sure that I succeeded. And they weren't Black professors. I had no Black professors in law school. So you have a different experience here than I had. I had no Black professors. I had several white professors who reached down and saw my potential, and they insisted. In fact, they told me I was going to clerk. I didn't even have a choice about it. And they arranged for me to interview for a clerkship, and they made sure that I was prepared to do my clerkship once I got there. I never forget Professor Randy Barnett, who was my contracts professor. I've told you guys before, he came up to me right at the beginning of class one day, and he said, "I want to see you in my office." And I thought I had done something wrong. And so I went to his office and I said, "Sir, whatever I did, I'll fix it. You just let me know." He said, No. He said, "I think you ought to think about being a law professor." He's the one who stayed with me, and he gave me stuff to read outside of class, gave me stuff to read on the side. And then when it came time for a clerkship, he helped to arrange for a clerkship for me. And his parting words to me is, "You better not embarrass me." So I always try to do my best. And when it comes to imposter syndrome, and I'll just wrap up with this. One of the questions I saw was, did you ever experience imposter syndrome, and how did you overcome it? I experience imposter syndrome every day. I have no idea why I'm here, and I have no idea how I got here. I just know that God has blessed me, and I'm just trying to do my best to honor what the Holy Spirit has placed in my lap. But every single day, I don't know whether or not other people viewing me think I'm competent or not. I just can't care about that. I've got to focus on what God has set before me and just try to do my best to honor him and to honor the blessing that he placed in my lap. I have a dinner tonight with Lord Alton of the United Kingdom House of Lords. I don't even know how to address him. Like, what do I say? Your lordship? So you don't overcome imposter syndrome. Something just stays with you, but you also can't let it defeat you. You just have to. You have to go with the blessing that God has given you.
What you're saying, and sort of what everyone's been saying, is really kind of, it's sort of building this image of succeeding and overcoming odds without necessarily having a lot of support. One of the questions that I think is kind of an interesting question to talk about here is, how has the concept of each one teach one and the engagement of Black professional mentorship shaped your career? And for those of y'all who aren't familiar with each one teach one, it's an old Black slogan that essentially emerged during slave times, where if you could learn to read, then your drive was then to teach another one to read, so we could expand the learning. Mr. McKenna, why don't we start with you? So how has the concept of each one teach one shaped your career and the engagement of Black mentorship?
Well, I have this idea that was instilled in me at Notre Dame, that you have an obligation beyond being a lawyer to do something for the community, do something for others. And so a lot of time I've spent trying to mentor younger people in our law firm, younger people in the community. There have been some younger people who reached out to me from the law school, from Balsa. One being a fellow who just bugged the heck out of me about getting a summer clerkship. And finally, I was able to arrange something for him. He was with us for a brief time until his wife made him move back to Oklahoma. And he's now a federal district judge. But I spent a lot of time just talking to people because as the dean and Judge Williams said, you really come from a circumstance where you don't know what it's all about. And you have to learn, you have to rely on people, and knowing that's how I got to where I've gotten, I've tried to impart that to others. And sometimes I think maybe I should start a little bit lower than law school and impart it to people in high schools so that they'll know what they're going to be facing and whether this is something they want, a game they really want to get into. It's not an easy job, but you have to learn.
Judge Williams, do you have any thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, and I want to go back to the imposter syndrome because Marcus and I are right on the same track because I felt like I was just like a fish out of water when I came to Notre Dame. But I built relationships. I was not one of those people that went to the Friday night beer parties before the game. You know, the guys, because in my class, there were 7 of us, they played on the intramural sports team, so they got to know people. And I can remember Tommy McGill ran for a student bar position. And I was very much into Balsa. And I was very, I think, sort of cloistered, at least in that first year. I joined the Women's Bar Association. And I learned from that experience that what you have to do is be nurtured in your soul by your affinity groups. And then that strengthens you to get engaged in the larger community. And that was a lesson that eventually penetrated. The other thing I'll say, because the dean was saying he was tagged for the clerkship, same thing happened to me. Dean Link called me in. I was like, oh Lord, what have I done? And the dean said, hey, I got a call from Luther Swiger. He's the chief judge of the 7th Circuit. He's a Notre Dame grad. He called me. There have been very few women law clerks and no Black women law clerks. And in his last year as chief, he'd really like to hire someone. And I thought about you. I just want to pause a minute to talk about the lesson of always trying to do your very, very best because you never know who's looking at you. You never know who's going to be the one helping you out, who's going to extend a hand. And like the dean, my mentors, there were no Black mentors at the law school. And so when it got posted that I got the clerkship, because I had done work in the Center for Civil Rights, I had a research position there. And Howard Glickstein recommended me for the job because he knew I could write. I'd taken taxation with the dean. The dean was fascinated with video cameras. They had just come in. That shows how long ago it was. And I had been involved in preparing hearings on police misconduct in South Bend, an issue that never goes away. I never knew the dean had looked at me. And so when it got posted that I got the clerkship, I could hear some grousing by some people in my class who, she got it, because she was Black. So then I was like, well, you know what? The dean could have easily said, no, Judge, I have no one. Let me give you someone else. Let me suggest someone else. But the dean thought I could do it. And so one of the things we have to do is put all that negative stuff. That's not your issue. That's not your issue. So you have to put that away and continue on the path. We have to remain focused. We have to think about what our people did before us, the challenges they faced, that we stand on their shoulders. and we have to move on because whatever we face pales in comparison to what they face. So in terms of helping, I've always been a teacher, like I said, so I volunteered in Catholic high school, teaching the grade school kids. When I got to Notre Dame, I started a program in the public schools, and we used to do Little Red Riding Hood, and I would do a little trial to try to explain to the kids. They would act it out, and we'd figure out if she had, was breaking and entering the house of the three bears. I mean, I've always been, I worked in the prisons because I didn't take the moot court team, which I should have, which again, Dean, was also the ignorance. I was like, no, legal aid. We were going to go into prisons and teach the prisoners how to write and do a book drive and everything, because it hadn't dawned on me I needed that academic credential of moot court. I could also do that other project. So I've always tried to reach out. So, and it's so important because we are blessed children and we have the obligation to give back, and that teach one, reach one, teach one, and being a different kind of lawyer at Notre Dame, that was just emphasized. And so when I graduated, when I was a baby lawyer, only 2 years out, really the year I graduated, there was a bar program that Ron Kennedy at Northwestern started for Black students. The pass rate for Black students was about 30%. I was in the commercial course, met a Northwestern student. He told me about the course that Ron had. I was like, well, can I get in it? So he went to Ron. Ron said, no, you went to Notre Dame. So, but I never forgot that. And a couple of years later, I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office with a guy who graduated from Northwestern. I said, is he still doing the program? He said, yes. I said, is the pass rate still 100%? He said, yes. I said, well, and is it still just Northwestern? He said, yes. I said, well, can you introduce me to him? So I went to to meet Kennedy with Al Moran. And I said, I think you should expand it. Well, he looked at me, who am I? And he's like, he had 100% pass rate. He said, no, I'm really not inclined to do that because, things are going real well. I said, well, what if I put a group of my friends together? You train us. We have a non-Northwestern group and we see how it goes. We had the same pass rate and we formed Minority Legal Education Resources, Inc. And more than 5,000 students of all races have taken that course. And it was always like that. And now the law schools refer students to us. So I like to tell that because other things I've started, like the Black Women Lawyers Association or Just the Beginning Pipeline organization that addresses just what Al said, from grade school through law school. I did this MLER as a baby lawyer. So it shows you the power that you can have if you have an idea. I believe in the power of one to affect change. And I think Notre Dame enforces and supports that concept that we have the power. And then you just gather all these ones with you and then you can make change. So that's the impact Notre Dame had on me, the reach one, teach one, as well as a special kind of lawyer, a different kind of lawyer.
If I could add something, I think it's curious that both the dean and Judge Williams talked about being tapped for clerkships. And I still remember being in the library one time in the afternoon, and behind me, I hear this very deep voice, and it was Dean O'Meara, who had one of the deepest voices in the world for particularly a short guy. Mr. McKenna, he comes up. Yes, Dean, what did I do? As the two of you said. And he said, how'd you like to go to Columbus, Ohio? I said, I've never been there, Dean. I wouldn't know what it's like. He said, well, I have a friend who may be getting appointed as a federal judge and he's going to need a law clerk. I'll tell him about you. I guess what I would impress the students with is don't ignore the professors, Black or white. They are people that are going to recognize something in you. And when you get out, you have the obligation to do the same thing, as Judge Williams said. it is each one teach one. Each one reach down and pull somebody up. I couldn't emphasize that anymore.
I so appreciate what both of you said here. You know, we're talking about this idea of each one teach one and what everyone's mentioning about sort of getting tapped for an opportunity. I just want to stop on something that Judge Williams said I thought was really important. The idea of I've gotten the opportunity and the people around me are probably thinking, oh, she got it because she was Black, or, you know, this idea of affirmative action got you there. You didn't get there on your own merit. And I want to ask you, Dean Cole, and you, Paris, to comment on this first, but what advice do you have for students who are contending with either the truth of that or the perception in their own minds that people are looking at me and they're thinking that what I have and what I've achieved isn't based on my qualifications, but it's based on the way that I look? Heather, you can start first.
I think that's tough because that's definitely something that I still struggle with. So I don't know if I can tell you how to overcome it, but I will say that I think this has been emphasized by everyone today is that you kind of just have to do your own thing. You can't really care about like what people think or like why they think that you're doing X, Y, and Z. You just have to do your own work, do the work, get your job. And like, as long as you're doing well at those things, like, it doesn't matter like why they think that you're succeeding. If you know that you're succeeding and you know that you're smart, like they can't take that away from you, right? So like when you leave here and you go to your first job, you go to your clerkship and like you're walking around wondering like, am I supposed to be here? Like you can have people be like, oh, like she only came because she went to Notre Dame, like they went to higher schools, or like that you're a person of color and like no one else around you is, but like you know that you went to a good law school and you know that you put in the work and that you know what you're talking about. So like no one can take that from you unless you let them, right? And so one thing that I learned being a lawyer for like only like 6 or 7 months is that like everyone is still kind of winging it. And so when I used to be really intimidated talking to partners or senior associates, I kind of realized that we're all just kind of walking around doing the best that we can. And so as long as you're walking around doing the best that you can do and like using the knowledge that you know that you have, it doesn't really matter what people think or like what they might reason as like why you're being successful or not. And you have to take that the same way as your failures, right? So you can't make your own failures worse because you're a person of color or because you're a woman or anything like that. Because everyone fails, and so your failures aren't any worse than anyone else's. And I think that's also something that I still struggle with, but like I have to tell myself like every single day. So I think that that's really important to keep in mind.
What was that Eleanor Roosevelt quote? No one can make you feel inferior without your consent.
Yeah, like you kind of just have to like walk around like that, honestly. Otherwise, it's gonna get
Cool. Yeah.
So yeah, I was very deeply influenced by my father. And I asked him once why he went to engineering school, and he said, you know, he went to college in the 60s and 70s, and he said that the great thing about engineering was that there's a right answer. Mathematics provides a right answer and a wrong answer, and it's not subjective and it's not subject to racism. And it two things struck me about that. One was, you know, he's right that you go into a field that is mathematical or scientific, there's just one right answer and a lot of wrong answers, and racism can't change that outcome. But it also suggested to me that his life choices were shaped by the racial constructs of the society that he lived in. And somebody asked me the other day about how it is that I raise so much money. So one of the things I love about my job is raising money. I absolutely love raising money. And I have the generosity of Al and Wendy McKenna to thank for some of that money that we've raised. But the thing I love, I experience this all the time. You know, I'm the first Black dean here. Is he being chosen because he's Black? I don't think about that. I'm a hyper competitive person. What I do think about is that Black or white, I've raised more money in 2.5 years than any dean has raised in 10 years in the law school. And in fact, in my first year as dean, I raised more money as the dean of the law school than any dean has raised for any college or school here at Notre Dame ever. And what I love about that is that fundraising is a scorecard. It doesn't ask whether I raise the most money as a Black dean or as a white dean. I raise the most money. And when I walk into a dean's meeting, they know it, right? And if they don't know it, I let them know.
You tell them.
No, I don't feel inferior. I don't even think about it. If they think that I'm inferior or I was chosen for dean because I'm Black, that's their problem. Their other problem is that they're gonna have to keep up with me.
There you go.
So can I just comment too on this, you said you're struggling with, I think we've all talked about how you just go for the excellence and it's the issue is the others. So I always think about, well, because I also started this program called Jumpstart in Chicago, where I have all the Chicago area and all the Illinois law schools now, where we get admitted students 3 weeks before school starts, and we try to tell them the basics and the fundamentals in a different way than orientation. And so one of the things I talk about is the chit. And so to me, this is a way to wrap your head around that. Everybody has a chit. The Notre Dame Law School class, when people are admitted, you want to have people that are from Iowa that maybe have been raised on the farm. You want to have people who've been in metropolitan areas. You want to have people maybe that have been in the military. You want to have people that have come from a Catholic education. I mean, there are people who their parents went to Notre Dame, their uncle went to Notre Dame. All of those are chits, okay? Because there's something special about everyone that allows them to be in the class. And to me, us being Black is just like another chit. So do not devalue what we bring to the table. Because when we talk about diversity, we want diverse casts from all perspectives, and that's always helped me. The second thing I wanted to say is, I talked about affinity groups and how important that is. And so let's get our strength. And I think the dean would agree with this too. I know his story. Sometimes we have to say yes when we think no, when people see the potential, like Alvin said. So I'll give you an example. I have been teaching trial ad at Northwestern for years. I love trial advocacy. I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office and I got tapped to teach at the Attorney General's Trial Advocacy School. I had a heavy caseload. I was like, I don't think I have time to teach, but I went. And every time they asked, I did. When I went on the bench, I got a call from the Federal Judicial Center. I love case management. And they were like, we'd like you to come and teach case management to the baby judges. So for 7 years, it didn't matter what was going on. I would recess a trial to go teach. Ultimately, I became a member of a judicial conference committee because I love case management. I love that committee, judges from all across the country. And the chair came to me and he said, it's time for me to step down. I think you should be the next chair. I had led some subcommittees. And we were at a cocktail party. I was like, Bob, I know you're joking. He said, no, I'm not joking. I think you should be the first chair. You should be the chair. Now, I was the first Black woman to ever chair a judicial conference committee. And so when I went home, I thought about it. I'm like, well, if Bob thinks I can do it, like maybe I can do it. And like, is there anybody else around that'll get this opportunity? I'm not saying this out of ego. You know that. Not out of ego. But I looked around and there was nobody else Black on the committee that had the experience. I said, I can do this. I did that. All those things. I got tapped by Hugh Will. He started the Federal Judges Association. I was a young baby judge. I was busy. It was the quadrennial conference. Hugh said, I think you should go to the meeting. I said, I can't go to the meeting. My caseload, I can't do it. I can't do it. Hugh went. I didn't know Hugh was going to nominate me as treasurer, but I ended up being treasurer 2 terms, eventually became president-elect, and then president of the Federal Judges Association, now a membership of over 1,100 federal judges. So I say that to say, we have to say yes when an opportunity comes, even when it may seem inconvenient, and to show you that you never know who's watching. And how important it is to me to build those leadership skills so you can be an effective force in the larger community. So I don't have any problem with people who say, hey, I want to practice. I'm going to practice in my own community. I want to go back to the Black community. I want to have, You know, I want those to be my clients. That's fabulous. But I also think because of the knowledge you gain, you have a voice that can be a part of the larger society voice. I just wanted to get that in because I think it's so important that we stand up and that we say yes to opportunities and be open to opportunities.
Completely agree. We have about 15 minutes left, and there's just one more question that I want to ask before we open it up to y'all to see if you have any questions to ask our panelists. But and this is specifically for our two panelists on Zoom and for you, Paris. You know, we're living in a time of significant divide in the country, and we've seen, you know, in 2020 a racial reckoning with the Black Lives Matter movement, a lot of racial justice protests. You know, it's a really unique time to be alive and also to, I think, be, you know, people of color in the practice of law. But in a climate like this, what is the significance of the law school having a Black dean for the first time, as well as having the largest Black class in our 1Ls? And Mr. McKenna, if you would like to start.
I would say it's significant in both respects, but the significance, as great as Dean Cole is, the significance is going to be the next one and the next class. Will this continue? We don't need, as great a job as the dean is doing and has done with fundraising and everything else, is that going to be it for a Black administrator of this law school? Having whatever the number is of Black law students in the current first-year class, is that going to stop? I think the whole thing is it's got to keep moving forward. We can't rest on what has already happened. So while it is significant, the significance is yet to come. Is it going to keep up? And I realized there've only been 11 deans of the law school. And I'm not chasing you away, Dean Cole, but it may be a while before there's a successor or a successor to your successor. But it's got to be based on the record that the dean has done. There's no problem with having a Black dean. There's no problem with having a lot of Black students in the class. I always say something that I think people will probably wince at. I would love when it comes time that while we honor our heritage and our ethnicity, that a person is not known as a Black lawyer from Notre Dame. They're known as a lawyer from Notre Dame, because that color thing disappears. And that's what we need to have happen, that while it's significant and it should continue, we shouldn't have it be the measuring stick. And as I think Judge Williams said, we shouldn't run away from our heritage. We should embrace it. And I'll shut up now.
Judge Williams, your thoughts?
Yeah, I want to pick up that point that Alvin made, and I agree with him, you know, and I think the dean is making moves to change the law school as an institution, the creation of your office, the fundraising, which Dean, we haven't even talked about what some of your plans are, but of course, there's power in raising that money. There are chairs that can be appointed. There's faculty that can be brought in. And of course, any law faculty has to represent the range of views. There is an atmosphere where students are actually like getting to know each other. There is value in the numbers. There is value in the numbers because after all, it should be people to people, Alvin, as you said, reaching out to one another. the color shouldn't be a barrier, but let's face it, we've come from, many of us, segregated silos. So you have kids in the class that have never like sat next to a Black person or a person, any person of color, have no idea what people are like, except what they've seen on TV, in the media, and that kind of thing. So part of, I think, what the dean's challenge is to get people to relate to each other in a real way and to really see each other. Because of course, everybody has a story. So we talked about our story with our parents. So it could be that your people are Irish and they were dealing with the potato famine in Ireland and they came over. Your people are victims of the Holocaust, or your people are coming from very slave-like conditions in Mexico and migrant farmers, or whatever the situation is. But we're all here because our parents and those behind us sacrificed so we could all be here. So that human condition is a common condition. And maybe I'm like a Pollyanna because I'm always thinking that things can change, and it is a very, very hard time now. But I think a lot of it is because people stay siloed. So to me, one of the things the dean and what he symbolizes, and because he stands for such excellence, is a recognition that we do belong at Notre Dame, that we do contribute, that we have made great contributions, and that we can move forward. So I think it's been significant. Because I mean, when he told me the numbers, I mean, he's admitted more people in this last class than we had the whole 3 years I was at Notre Dame. And it makes a difference in terms of how we feel, but I think it makes a difference on all the students in the law school, because they're having to partner with Blacks and they're having to be in study groups and doing all these things together, and that brings understanding.
Can I add one more thing? Judge Williams mentioned affinity groups, and I think that's all great. But the other thing I would encourage is all the Black students shouldn't sit at the lunch table together. They should do what Judge Williams has just hit on, is you got to get to know the other people, and you got to get the other ethnics, the other races, and they need to get to know you, that you are not some wild-eyed, whatever it is that's portrayed on television, but you're a human being just like them, with some of the same concerns, same fears, and the same abilities. And they're not going to get to know you if you just stay with your affinity group.
Paris, you mentioned this earlier, but what are your thoughts?
So I agree that having a really large FALSA class is only as significant as you make it. So if you keep doing it, that's really great. But it's also not just about admitting a large number of Black students, it's also making sure they succeed, right? So there's no point in having 30 of you at this school if only like 10 of you get jobs and like are successful, right? That's just like meeting a quota. So I think that in order for that to really matter, like they need to, like the university has to invest in Black students the same way they invest in other groups here. Because there is a like misallocation of resources at Notre Dame, and I think that we all see it in some places. And so I think that for that to like mean something, that you have to be willing to not only get Black students here, but then invest in them while they're here. Because if you don't invest in them, then like they would have been better off going to like literally any other school and like being around more Black people, more Black professors. Translating that into the legal world, I think that given everything that's happened since 2020, there is a larger push among law firms to recruit more diverse students, to have more like diversity and equity initiatives within the law firms themselves. I can speak for my firm, like we have a whole consulting group now where we do diversity and equity training for our clients, because it's so important to clients that like the lawyers they work with are diverse. So there's so many opportunities that have come up out of the pandemic and out of all the racial like injustice and like unrest. And I think that like it's on all of you to take advantage of it, but the opportunities are out there, and I think that's like really great. But that requires you to use the resources that Notre Dame has, and for the Notre Dame to give you those resources. So like I said, I love that there's more than 8 of you because that was a really isolating experience. And it's like, while I got to know the other 7 Black students at Notre Dame really well, it would have been nice to have more of us. And that's really great, but it doesn't matter if you guys don't get to succeed the same way that other students here succeed. So I think that the significance will be shown by like how successful you guys are and making sure that Notre Dame pours into you. So I think that that's how it can be really important.
Diversity without equity and inclusion is just window dressing.
Exactly.
Marcus, I'd be remiss if I didn't give you a chance to comment on any of this.
So I can only reinforce everything that's been said so far. I think that the way Al McKenna makes a great point. This cannot be a blip on the timeline. This has to be the start of something new. The way we got the large diversity that we got in this class, the LGBTQ diversity, the increase in BALSA students, all of the diversity we got this year was largely through the efforts of students making phone calls to admitted students. So for this to continue, it can't just be my effort. It has to be your effort. I need you to help. Now, I don't want to put an extra burden on you, but if you believe in this place and believe in the direction we're going, it's to your benefit to help in the recruiting effort. The other thing I want to say is I was in Los Angeles a month ago speaking to a large group of donors, and I got a question out of the audience from a donor who said, I give a lot of money to Notre Dame, and my son applied to Notre Dame law school and didn't get in. How come I'm not getting recognized for what I've given to Notre Dame? And I said, look, I appreciate that you've given to Notre Dame, but the truth of the matter is, as an alum of Notre Dame, you went here 20 years ago or more, right? 30 years ago, and you had a child. If I let in the children of all alumni who went here 20 or 30 years ago, guess what Notre Dame would look like right now? It would look like it looked 30 years ago. I can't do that because that's not the world we live in anymore. So I appreciate your donation, but your donation should be because we are trying to train a different kind of lawyer, not trying to train your progeny, right? We are not trying to have the Notre Dame of 30 years ago. And the other thing I told him was that you have the resources. Go get some test prep to get your child up to the standard. Because the fact of the matter is, and what people don't want to believe, but is true, is that we do not lower the admission standards for anybody. You are here because you qualified under our admission standards. And the reason why you chose us was because we may have shown you more love than other law schools. But no one lowered any admission standards for you. And if anything, the admission standards only get lowered when I get a call from the development office. By the way, they stopped calling me. They stopped calling me about a year ago. But I told them, don't call me about like some donor's child, because we admit 180 students a year. And if I take your donor's child, there's no way that we're going to maintain the excellence at this place. There is nobody here in this first year class who did not meet our admission standards, not a single person. And that includes children of alumni. If you're an alum and your child is applying to Notre Dame Law School, they will get in, not because you're an alum, but because they met our standards. And if they don't get in, it's because they didn't meet our standards. And it's just that simple.
On that note, looks like we don't have any more time for questions. We're just at 1:30, but please everyone join me in thanking all of our panelists for this really great conversation. Thank you very much, Judge Williams and Mr. McKenna. Thank you, Paris, and thank you again to the Dean. And thank all of you. I hope you enjoyed the Chick-fil-A as much as we enjoyed the conversation, and please enjoy the rest of your day.